Welcome to the Between the Pages podcast, brought to you by Boldly Seeking Ministries. Join the conversation every other Wednesday with the team and other special guests as we navigate how we can live a bold faith in between the valleys and the mountaintops of life. This episode is sponsored by Lakeview Covenant Church, where together they pursue Christ and advance his priorities across the street and around the world. Now, let's get to this week's conversation. Welcome, friends, to the Between the Pages podcast. This is Christmas episode one. Merry Christmas, happy holidays. We are now in a season of Advent. I'm so excited because the 2 episodes for the month of December are actually going to be overviews of our Christmas study that we released last year at Christmas time. And I would say Jenny and I were just talking before we were recording this episode, but this is probably one of my personal favorite devotionals that we've ever written.
I really, really liked it. It's called A Walk to Bethlehem, and we broke down like the whole story of the Nativity from mostly the book of Luke, and it was just like a beautiful rendition of the Nativity story. And we took it verse by verse and day by day, and we're just going to give like a brief summary about the whole thing, and it's going to be good.
Yeah, so a part of why we chose to do more of a verse-by-verse standpoint of this study was to kind of look at this idea of the emotional dimension of Christmas. And, I think around Easter time too, and this is something that we'll talk about a little bit closer, is the emotional side of Easter. Because at the same time, yes, Jesus was fully God, but he was also fully man. Yeah. And the idea that Jesus felt emotions. And sometimes I think we look at Bible story characters and we're like, oh, they were like incredible. But it's like, for Mary, like all of a sudden this angel is like just popping out of nowhere and is like, you're going to have a child and he's going to be the savior of the world. Like, think of the emotions behind that. Like, she's, 1, probably scared. 2 is like, are you real? And 3, just being like, how is all this going to happen? Mm-hmm. And so basically in the show notes, we have a link to this study and we encourage you to download it. You can follow along, or since this is at the beginning of the Christmas season, you can walk through. It's a 3-week study. There's a different kind of synopsis of a passage every single day, 7 days a week for 3 weeks, and as well as questions and things to ponder, challenges, anything like that. But today in particular, we are going to look at just a brief overview of week 1. We're going to talk about it. So Jenny was one of the writers on this study. And so Jenny, just kind of give us a little bit of an overview. Maybe let's start with day 1, which was titled Full of Surprises.
Yeah, as we were writing this, it really helped me slow down to like fully think about verse by verse the story of the Nativity, because you've seen it in movies before, you've heard of it through Sunday school, and it was just really a good way to like deep dive into these verses and really like that emotional connection that you were talking about, Rebecca. So the Full of Surprises one is really from Mary's perspective, how she was very young, she was a teenager, probably like thinking of her dream wedding. She's gonna get married to Joseph, which it was an arranged marriage, but she's probably still excited about it, because I mean that's what the time was. I mean, like that was your womanhood, is now you get to be a wife and stay at home and raise kids and things like that. So I'm sure she was super excited, planning her wedding, thinking about all that. And then her plans totally flipped when she got this surprise from an angel of all people. And I really think that God chose Gabriel to be like this specific angel to give her this message, because Gabriel was so like gentle and kind to her and was able to like just tell her all these things that she was like looking forward to, and really reassuring her, and kind of like taking a big step of faith for her was huge, because then Gabriel is also reminding her like, it's okay, God's got this, you don't have to take it on your own. Like, this is a lot of emotions to process, but also like God is fully with you and supporting you in all of this. So I think Gabriel was specifically chosen as the angel to deliver this message, because it wasn't like a fiery angel with a sword. Like, that would have been crazy scary.
I probably would have been scared. I would have been like, so I'm gonna walk the other way. Thank you.
Exactly.
Or more like run.
Yeah. So she was able to just like really rely on the Lord and keep her emotions in check too. I shared a little bit at the end of day 1 about like my own story, and it wasn't obviously like an angel came to my front door with like a box labeled surprise, but like I had planned to be a 3rd grade teacher, and I didn't get that position. And after hearing that news of not getting that teaching position, I was offered a like a kindergarten aid, and I was like, that's not really what I was hoping for, but sure, I'll take it. And like I really was able to do something like what Mary was doing and just process your emotions and think about it from like a perspective like God's got this. And I know it's not quite like the same scenario, but just thinking through like on your own story, if you have something that you had planned in your head for a long time, like a wedding or a job or something like that, and then it didn't go according to your plan, it was a good surprise in the end on how God worked all that out.
Yeah, I love that. And I think going into then day 2 of this week, kind of what you said of Mary's had the time to process. And I love how you took Luke 1 verses 34 through 38, like just a few short verses, but it's so complex because you have the angel Gabriel is reminding Mary, like, nothing's impossible with God. Like, I know you're scared. I know that there's a lot going on. But he almost keeps, like, Gabriel almost keeps talking about this baby that Mary's going to have. And it's like, okay, slow down. And it goes into, like, he will be great and he will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord will give to him the throne of his father David. And he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. And of his kingdom there will be no end, which is verses 32 and 33. Like, okay, all of a sudden, Mary's like, so this baby I'm going to have is going to inherit the kingdom of David, and he's going to be the God, the Son of the Most High, and all these things. Like, you even bring up this question, like, could you even imagine an angel telling you that, like, your future child is going to be great on this whole other level of, like, he's going to be the Son of the Most High? Like, I could not imagine that.
No, that's crazy. Like, every mom obviously thinks that their kid is the best and, like, awesome. But Mary's was literally perfect. Like, her son was the Son of God. Like, that's crazy. She probably didn't think that she was worthy. She probably was questioning, like, why me, God? And that really just all came into play, like, throughout the rest of the nativity story. And I love how we can see it from, like, different perspectives of each character, too, and how God's blessings and his assurance is just really, like, portrayed through each character in the nativity story.
The thing I love about just this first part is the way that Mary responds to Gabriel. Like, she's just got this crazy, incredible, good, wild, surprising news, but the way that she responds, and it's almost like a challenge to us of, like, how do we respond? And I think this is almost a reoccurring theme, like, from our very, very first episode to our fully, like, public launch of the episode, of this idea of, like, how do we respond to a season change or a yes or different things that come up in our life. But after Mary kind of just absorbs all that Gabriel has told her, she gives this humble response in verse 38. And she says, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." Like, she understands, and what you said in your week of the study, like, she understands what she has been called to do, and her purpose has changed, but it's still a divine purpose.
Oh,
like,
absolutely, yeah.
What you said, like, okay, your purpose in those times is to be a wife and a mother. Well, now she's like, yes, she's going to be a wife and a mother, but it's on this whole other level of, like, okay, yeah, this might not be exactly what you're expecting, but just think of, like, how this new purpose of raising the Son of God is going to still change the world on a drastic level.
Yeah, absolutely. Jumping into day 2 a little bit, it goes through verses 34 to 38, and they were talking about how, like, nothing is impossible with God, and Mary was thinking, like, how can I have a baby? I'm a virgin. Like, I've never been with any man before, and, like, how on earth am I able to have a child? And I, like, italicized on earth because this wasn't an earthly thing. This was a heavenly birth, a heavenly miracle that was happening for Mary. And so when we think about, like, earthly things, God's, like, power and divine, like, creativity is not limited by what we can think on earth. Like, he's totally unlimited when it comes to, like, heavenly things. So just this whole, like, miraculous story was really important to, like, italicize. So I was like, on earth is the main phrase, and then thinking about it wasn't an earthly thing, it was all about God's heavenly plan for us. Yeah.
That's so good. I don't think I actually really caught that until you talked about it, of, like, the italicized on earth, of, like, okay, this is this heavenly divine plan, like you said. And I also want to just take a different standpoint of this situation. So Mary gets this news from an angel, and she's not married to Joseph yet. They have not slept together yet. And all of a sudden, she's about to go back to Joseph and be like, you will not believe this.
Yeah.
And so day 3 is from the chapter Matthew 1, verses 18 through 24. And Jenny ties us into Joseph's perspective of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes we just think about, like, Mary and the birth of Jesus, but, like, Joseph played a huge role in it. So I really like taking the verses out of Matthew because it gives a more detailed, like, expression to what his emotions were and feeling. So in that day, it was, like, super taboo and, like, shameful if you got pregnant before you were married. So for Mary to come to Joseph humbly and say, like, this is what happened, you will not believe the day I've had, and for Joseph to, like, keep her in his life and not shun her or not, like, disown her was really big for him. It was really a humbling purpose for him too, because I'm sure people were talking in the town like, oh, did you hear about Mary? And Joseph really stood up for her and was able to provide for her, like, throughout the whole story. So I really just like that example that he had. He was probably taken aback, of course, because he's like, wait, what is happening? Like, an angel came to you today? Like, that's just crazy. And he didn't really know Mary very well because it was an arranged marriage. So for him to just, like, get to know Mary more and then helping her out by, like, not labeling her in a shunning way or a disowning way really, I think, made the relationship even stronger.
Right, and you see in those verses too, like, he didn't want anything bad to happen to Mary.
Yeah.
And before making this, like, irrational decision based on emotions and confusion and anger and surprise and excitement and, like, what just happened, like, because he, all of a sudden, like, Mary is just telling him these things. Like, he hasn't experienced anything from God himself.
Correct, yeah.
And the thing that is so cool of this idea of God's divine plan is, instead of Joseph making an irrational decision to call off the engagement, he says, I need to sleep on this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And, you know, I almost think, like, kind of, you hear the phrase, like, never go to bed angry when you're married or in a relationship. And that's something for me that I take really close to, because I think, yes, go to sleep on it, but I don't think it necessarily means, like, go to sleep on it, but, like, take this space apart to just process.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what Mary and Joseph did. Like, Joseph physically went to sleep.
Yeah.
But I think in relationships nowadays, it's like, take the physical distance for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to just process and then come back and figure out the issue. And so that when Joseph did go to sleep, that is when he was able to have this divine intervention with the Lord. And so in verse 20, it starts out by saying, and as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which was conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And you kind of said, if that is not a telltale sign, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Like, an angel is popping into your dreams saying, like, this is a divine intervention from the Lord. She is conceived from the Holy Spirit, and you should still take her as your wife. And, you know, he basically is like, hold up, don't break off anything. This is a plan. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And as the angel is still talking to Joseph in his dream, he actually tells him what the baby's name is going to be. I love that
too, yeah.
And his name will be Jesus.
Yeah.
And the thing that is so interesting, and you bring this up in day 3 of the study, is that both Mary and Joseph were told that they should name their future son Jesus at different times.
Yeah.
Like, they were not told that, like, you know, when you're having a kid nowadays, you pick out the name together.
Right.
But God is, like, telling Mary separately and Joseph separately, your son's name will be Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so cool. Because we both have friends that are pregnant or have had kids, and there's a lot that goes into picking the name of your child.
First name, middle name, last name. And well, it's like, last name's a given.
Right. But it's like, it's an honoring thing. Usually it's like, a middle name that's been passed down, or a name that's like strong in your family, or naming it after your grandfather or something like that. So to have the name of like Jesus picked out for them already, and for both of them to hear that directly from an angel is like, that's pretty important. That's pretty important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we have, all of a sudden we have Mary, Joseph, Gabriel, and we have, I would consider the embryo Jesus as main characters of this first part. But there's two other really important characters that I think kind of help with this idea of miracles, and that is Elizabeth and Zachariah. So could you dive deeper into day 4 of week 1?
Yeah. So when you're hearing the nativity story, you kind of forget about like those side characters, and Elizabeth and Zachariah are really like important side characters. So Elizabeth is related to Mary. I think they're cousins. And as Mary is pregnant and she's finally like, she's told Joseph, they're okay with it. They're super excited to have a kid now. She goes to visit Elizabeth, and not knowing that Elizabeth is pregnant, Elizabeth feels her baby jump inside of her while Mary is like approaching her and coming to her. And Elizabeth is like, oh, like this is a divine like intervention, a huge heavenly sign. Like my baby is excited that you're pregnant. And they're both like given huge opportunities to just like fully live in the blessings of what God is showing them through miracles. Because Elizabeth's pretty old. She's like past the age where it's like healthy for her to have kids. She's pretty old in her age. And so she and Zechariah were kind of like, I guess we're just never going to have children. And the background for Elizabeth's story is that Zechariah was actually told by an angel that you're going to have children. And Zechariah was like not taking the news very well because he thought it was a joke. He's like, no, we've been trying to have kids. We're just too old. It's not the time for us. It's not like what God wants. But then when an angel tells you like, nope, you're going to have kids, then Zechariah was like, just blew it off and kind of laughed at it. And the angel was like, because you took it as a joke, you're not going to be able to speak until your son is born. Like, this is serious. And so when Elizabeth saw Mary and the baby like rejoiced at Mary's presence, it's like that was just their telltale sign. Like, this is a huge blessing and miracle from God, which I loved reading about.
And I just want to look at that comparison between Zachariah's encounter with Gabriel and Mary's encounter.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's the same angel is telling two different characters of this story a very similar thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it all came down to the response, like you said. Like, Mary's response, like, yes, they both had very similar doubts of, like, how could this happen?
Yeah.
Like, for Mary, it was, how could this happen? I'm a virgin. And for Zachariah, it was, how could this happen? We've been trying for years. And of Elizabeth's age. Well, again, the response to Zachariah is, like, he was just kind of, like, joking. He was like, yeah, that's never going to happen. Kind of being like, whatever. But Mary's response is this humble response, like, I am a servant of the Lord. And so for Mary, it shows us like how we respond to something is so important. Like, if there is something that's coming up in like your life where it's like you have to make a decision, or, you know, you feel this kind of sense that God is calling you to something, it's like, how are you going to respond? Are you going to respond in a humble heart or a prideful heart? And that's kind of almost like what I love about how you bring in Elizabeth and Zachariah's experiences, because it's like, even though, yes, it was more of this, like, okay, that's never going to happen, kind of be like, God, really? You sent this angel to tell me, like, I don't believe you. But even though, like, he didn't talk until John was born, they were still able to have this kind of full-rounded experience of experiencing the miracle that God had for them, and that was to have a son. And so kind of then going into day 5. So we've had Mary and Joseph and little tiny Jesus. Gabriel, we've had Zachariah, Elizabeth, and now we get into this one part, which I think we kind of skip over in the nativity story, but I think it's so important as we look at the humble heart of Mary. And it's titled A Mary's Song, which is actually a part of scripture, Luke 1:46-55, which is Mary's song. So Jenny, do you want to dive deeper into kind of what what is Mary's song? What was it about? All those things.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about her response to Gabriel versus Zacharias, it really is shown in this like poem, this like heartfelt, deep emotional pull that Mary had. And I like to imagine her like singing it or like saying it out loud as she's like cleaning or like getting the nursery ready or whatever she's doing, preparing for this child. And she's really just fully saying like her soul is magnifying the Lord and her spirit rejoices in God. And that really is like a turnaround from like the scary feeling that she was having at the beginning of the nativity story. She was confused, she was afraid, she's like, how is this happening? And now she's fully turned around and thinking like, I am a servant of God. I'm going to give him the glory. I'm preparing myself for this. He's shown his strength in me through this time. And that's just really a cool, it's not a quick turnaround. It probably took a couple of weeks to like fully like assess what is happening. And just for her to like really think about like, this is lines of thanksgiving and gratitude that she's just pouring her heart into. She's no longer afraid or that confused woman at the beginning of the story. And she's just really deep diving of like all the good things that God is giving her. She can see that now. At the beginning, she probably was like, oh, I had this wedding planned and now it's not going to be the way that she thought it was going to be.
Right. And it's again this comparison of Zachariah's response to Gabriel versus Mary's response. And this song of praise, it does add, again, that difference between the two, because even though Mary has a sense of fear and unknown and just a lot of questions, she has respect for God's design purpose for her life and for her child's life. And so I love this quote that you have in this day in particular, which says, God often uses people who are not great in society's eyes to work his great purposes on earth. And I love that, because you look at Mary, like she was just any normal woman, but now all of a sudden there's this monkey wrench thrown in the plan where she's still a virgin yet pregnant and is going to hold the Son of God and raise up the Son of God to one day be called the Son of the Most High, to inherit the kingdom of David, to save the world.
Huge pressure.
And it's like, yeah, again, no pressure. Like, could you imagine like being a new mom and like all of a sudden you're holding the king of the world and you're like, I have to raise a king of the world.
Right.
Like, what?
Yeah.
And at the end of Mary's song, she kind of ends it a little bit in a different way. So I kind of want to read through some of what you had written here. And it says, Mary ends her song with the hope for the future generations. As he spoke to our fathers, Mary's song is something that I always just glazed over in the nativity story and never really appreciated it before. But after kind of reading through all of this, we see with the way that she says, my soul magnifies and my spirit rejoices, you hear that sound of excitement and gratitude for the first time mother. And then quotes like, done great things in me, is a phrase showing Mary's servant heart and being a tool for God to use. And then when she goes through all of these things that the Lord has done, the phrase, he filled the hungry with good things, was kind of one of those things where it's like all of a sudden you're seeing the characteristics of God in Mary's song.
I know. Yeah, that's cool.
Which is so, so cool.
Yeah.
But then they have
another monkey
wrench in the plan, where it's kind of a little bit of a jump in time frame. Mary is probably most likely 8.5 to 9 months pregnant.
She's popping already.
And all of a sudden, Caesar Augustus decreed a census to count the population, and they have to then go back to their hometown of Bethlehem. And all of a sudden, Mary and Joseph are probably freaking out again.
Yeah.
And so as we look at day 6 of this first week, and I love how we're kind of doing this like discussion, deep dive into it. And friends, I encourage you, download this study. It's in the show notes. Download it, actually walk through it, highlight certain phrases, read the verses in full, because it is so amazing just to look at this emotional dimension. Like, Mary and Joseph probably didn't want to travel at this time. She was pregnant, but there was no option. You had to go back to the hometown of the husband. And so for Joseph, that was Bethlehem. And so this is taken out of Luke 2:3-5. And so then on this road trip, you probably there's so many people on the road still. You had to pack up everything. It's very uncomfortable. It's hot. It's dusty. Like, I'm sorry, I could not. Yeah. Like, I can barely make it through a 10-hour car ride. That's why I always prefer to fly. It's like point A to point B in 2.5 hours. But since this census is happening everywhere at the same time, people are traveling, and Elizabeth and Zachariah had their son John, and like Gabriel promised Zachariah could speak again. Mary and Joseph were probably celebrated with them and congratulated them on their healthy baby, packed up their belongings and headed out. So all of a sudden, like, they were going to have like, oh, the cousins are together, all these things. Yeah. Oh, now we actually have to like walk 90-ish miles to get to Bethlehem. Like, I could not imagine. And to then have this scare of like, what if something happens within these 90 miles? Like, there is no hospitals.
Right.
You are on the side of this dusty trail.
No GPS.
No GPS. You are using the stars. Yeah. And so kind of then diving into that, like that part of the passage in Luke in chapter 2, it doesn't really give any description of the travels that Mary and Joseph had, but I don't know if you've watched The Chosen and like their Christmas part of y'all go watch The Chosen. I love it. I stand by what they're doing of just really bringing these stories that we read to life. And you know, The Chosen, there's another movie out there. It's called The Nativity Story that kind of shows also too this travel period. You know, we don't see it in Luke, but you kind of get with the culture and the demographics of where they were, what it was like. Absolutely, and it was rough, like we talked about.
Right.
And so this kind of like idea of, even though like that day in particular was just talking about this road trip and this unexpected thing that's just popping up, I think it's kind of this reminder of like, how do we handle different ups and downs in our life? How do we handle you take the concept of between the pages. How do you handle from the valley to the mountaintop? There's so much in between. And it could be a short period or a long period. For Mary and Joseph, it was 90 miles. Right. Like, how did they stay faithful during that time? Knowing, like, when the time was right, the baby would be born. Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking, too, like, even today, relationships and significant others that go on trips together, that's either like the breaking point or like the stronger point of the relationship. Like, oh, you forgot to pack your passport, are you kidding me?
Right.
Or like those things. And then it's like, or it could be like the best time of your life when you're traveling with like somebody you want to spend the rest of your life with. So even though they didn't know each other that well, I really think this trip like established the foundation of like, this is what our marriage is going to look like. We're in this together. We're going to like keep powering through. It's super hard right now. It's like cold at night, it's freezing, and then there's also like animals around, and Joseph had to like protect her and make sure she was safe, and food and all that. Like, that's a really trying time for them. And I think, I mean, it kind of obviously it happened for a reason, but if they didn't have to travel to Bethlehem, they wouldn't have that 90 miles together to like spend that time getting to know each other more and like really just praying over each other and thinking about their future together. So I like that part where it's like God has a plan all in store, and we don't really see it all the time, but
and I think it gave space and time for them to also talk about their fears. To talk about like what they were scared about. How are they going to raise, because they were both told again that this is going to be the Son of the Most High. You're going to name him Jesus, and to like just have that conversation of like, okay, how are we going to raise this child? Like, I'm nervous. And you know, that's like you said, I think that's something that we can take into relationships nowadays, or even friendships, of like, create the space, especially if you're heading into a season of more of a commitment and a long-term relationship, engagement, marriages. Like, create that space to talk about your fears, to talk about like, how are you going to live life together? And that's something I think even in just like my last relationship, that I was like, oh wow, like, it was moving fast, but we didn't create the space to have those conversations. And that's something that I'm like, okay, I want to have those conversations with whoever my future husband is going to be, because that's so important, where you create that deep connection within yourself. And so as Mary and Joseph, they're walking 90 miles, they're just about to enter into Bethlehem, and then all of a sudden, the unexpected timing of it all, Mary starts to feel labor pains. And I can only imagine like the shock in their eyes of like, okay, this is happening. And
it's happening now,
of course, we literally just get to Bethlehem. But the thing is like with the census, like people are rushing.
It's packed
to get to their hometown. And so like everyone is in the inns, everyone is at relatives' house, everything. And so here's Joseph wanting to have a nice place for Mary to have her child. Yet also I feel like there was a part of Joseph where he was thinking like, I want the best for this son of the Most High.
Right.
And to give him the best. Well, sure enough, he's knocking at all the doors, and the innkeeper at the very end said, the only thing I have is a stable. And I think in all of this, there's so many important kind of, I would say, like symbolisms with that of being born in a stable, being born in a feeding trough, like being wrapped up in cloths. And kind of in a couple weeks, we're going to talk about what those symbolisms are. Because they are so important. And I am reminded in the unexpected times of things that unexpected things during unexpected times can be our biggest blessings. And I want to say that again because I love it. Unexpected things during unexpected times can be our biggest blessings.
Yeah, absolutely. They had so many valleys and mountaintops in this story of like a couple months of her pregnancy and just finding out like everything, the fear, the worry, the anxiety, all that is kind of like going away as they just like take a breath and like just figure out what the next steps are. And then as we go into the next week of this study, we really talk about those symbolizing and moving on after what happens after Jesus is born, and really just diving into it verse by verse is, I think, really helpful, because sometimes we just quick read the story before we open presents on Christmas morning, and it just this time of Advent is really like preparing your hearts for like the day of Christmas and Jesus's birth.
And you know, it's cool because, you know, we have these 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, but then also the Lenten season before Easter. And like, how can we live into Advent and live into Lent all year round and not just take the 40 days of Lent and the 4 weeks of Advent to just fully focus on the coming of the Lord and then the death of Jesus? But like, how can we reflect on this throughout the entire year and prepare our hearts for when the kingdom will come again, and thinking that way? And how can the story of the nativity and the Christmas story really reflect on how we can prepare our hearts and how we can prepare for Jesus' second coming, whenever that may be? Again, unexpected things during unexpected times can be our biggest blessings. The unexpected return of Jesus is going to be during a very unexpected time, but it's going to be our biggest blessing.
Absolutely.
Man, this is a lot in this episode. It was so good. I loved it. I am so ready to just dive a little bit deeper into the birth of Jesus as we go throughout this story in a couple weeks. So friends, I encourage you, I challenge you to download the study. This is your challenge this week. Download the study. It's below in the show notes. And do it with a friend, or do it by yourself, or do it with a mentor or a small group or a group of friends, Bible study, whatever. Start walking through at the beginning of this Advent season through this study. It's going to help prepare your hearts for Christmas, not Easter. It's going to prepare your hearts for Christmas, but it's also going to challenge you in how we can think of how we can start preparing our hearts for different unexpected things that come in our life. In every day, but also how we can prepare our hearts for the second coming of Jesus. And so we thank you for joining us. We know this is a longer episode, but it was so good. And feel free to, if you want to like stop and start this podcast as you're going through each day just to hear our own commentary on it, that is another way that you can go about this. And again, all the links are going to be in the show notes. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, everything. Click the notification button so you are up to date when we post different things. The nice thing that I'm really looking forward to, since we are going to look at the study deeper this month, it's been out for a year now, but then on our social media to almost take it a next level deeper. And so over the next couple week and a half or so, we're going to be diving even deeper into week 1 and so on and so forth. So thank you for joining us. Merry Christmas. We cannot wait to see what the Lord does in this Advent season. And so make sure that you come back in a couple weeks where we do a deeper dive into week 2.